What do you do on Valentine's Day when you realise that you don't have a suitable present? Write a poem or song? After a romantic weekend in Paris, Jamie Lonsdale felt very inspired and unusually creative. His new single, Paris, will hopefully take you all the way along the Seine. If it so much as stirs a beautiful memory, you need to let him know. And Jamie Lonsdale joins me now. How are you doing, Jamie?
Hello, Phil. Thank you very much for inviting me onto your show.
No problem. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Now, as a boy, Jamie, you were often told soon you'll be old enough to be fitted for your military uniform, with ancestors including the Duke of Wellington and Lord Raglan, who was the British commander in the Crimean War, and a further 3 on the battlefield at Waterloo. It was compulsory that you would do your duty. The Grenadier Guards was the family's expectation, and but not fancying the idea of spending nights in the trenches, you joined the Navy at 18 and trained as an officer at Dartmouth. You served for 5 years, including a stint in Northern Ireland before your final commission on board the Royal Yacht Britannia, which was very grand. What was it like growing up with these expectations?
Well, Phil, you asked the million-dollar question there. I think from the age of 6, my grandmother was tucking me into bed and telling me that it would soon be time to be measured up for the Grenadier's uniform. And I actually had very little desire to go and sit in trenches.
Yes.
Looking round for an escape route, I joined the Navy, and my grandfather, who was a grenadier, my father was a grenadier, my grandparents were none too pleased about this. And it was only when they came to my passing out parade at Dartmouth, when it was the Queen was taking the parade, and when we midshipmen marched finally up the steps in front of the college, Britannia Royal Naval College. When we hit that top step, we were commissioned. And my grandfather came up and hit me on the back and he said, "I forgive you." And I think it really was only when he saw that the Navy could march that he felt it was acceptable. And actually, I've learned much, much later that all my ancestors going way back were in the Navy.
Wow, but there you go then.
My grandmother had not been looking back far enough.
So it was meant to be, wasn't it,
So I'd
Jamie?
like to have words with her, but she's not here any longer.
No,
so.
that's right, yes. You'll have to have words with her on the other side.
Absolutely.
Yes, just say, you see, the Navy, that was my calling.
Quite. And I have to say I loved it. You know, it was a great way to see the world. You know, for anyone who's leaving university or not wanting to go to university, you know, it's a great way to spend a few years. And I appreciate every day what it taught me.
And I think what it is as well is generally your grandparents there and your family seeing you going to the top step and, you know, seeing that, you know, you's marched and everything. And maybe they wanted the kind of discipline that was on offer in the other forces.
Well, I think it doesn't matter where you serve. I think it's a very good thing for self-discipline and leadership. You learn a lot of skills that are useful later on in life. And I've always been very grateful for my time in the Navy.
Of course, of course. Now, it seems that you are very well connected with the Royals. What was it like finding out you had such connections?
Well, I've always been very grateful for those connections. And I think that the great sadness was the death of the Princess of Wales.
Of course.
Such a shock to everybody. I was actually driving a car at the time in Angus in Scotland. And I remember I was turning right onto dual carriageway, and I totally, when they announced it on the news, I completely lost my concentration. Thank God there were no cars coming at that particular moment.
So maybe it was like, you were able to have that moment by chance in order to take it all in.
Yes, and I then drove to Edinburgh Airport, and I can remember being astounded that life was going on as normal. I think it was only later in the day, when the media was drumming it in, that people started to invest emotionally in the loss.
Of course.
Which was quite interesting. But when I arrived at Edinburgh Airport, there were queues of people, and nobody was even, discussing it. That hit me as quite a contrast.
I bet. And the Royal Yacht Britannia wasn't your first link to the Royals. In fact, old Pangbornian Jamie is a direct descendant of King Edward I. Queen Mary was godmother to your grandmother and Jamie's former wife and lady-in-waiting to Diana, Princess of Wales, who was a close family friend and godmother to your eldest child. And at their wedding in 1984, guests included the Queen Mother, Princess Margaret, and Diana. The Royals are quite a musical family. Do you think it's in the blood?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because years ago, it was Princess Margaret who brought music into my home.
Right.
And she was very keen on her music. And we used to sing around the piano after dinner. She'd always make sure that there was a good pianist around. I remember Cleo Lane and Johnny Dankworth, in particular, great musicians.
Yes.
And I think that opened my eyes. My parents had been in the music business. They ran off together and got married.
Right.
And they set up the first record club in the world.
Wow.
And they called it the World Record Club. And my mother was called, her maiden name was Bentley. So it was Fiona Bentley Productions. And she did something like, she produced 60 shows on vinyl.
Wow.
23 Shakespeare plays. And Sir Laurence Olivier, she had reading the Bible.
My goodness.
And she shipped over is one of the main orchestras from Israel, and so that it was all authentic. And I know that he did it incredibly well. He really cared when he was reading sort of stories of David and Goliath and some of the better known stories. Every syllable carries weight.
Yes.
And the clarity of his voice. He brought the Bible alive. And that's what my mother, her idea was to capture. And she sold these, the Living Bible, I think it was called, was Sir Laurence Olivier. He said he'd never, ever worked so hard in his entire life. I think it was like 2 or 3 months he was working on it.
Wow. Just to get everything just right.
He wanted to get it absolutely right. And my mother, her great thing was being a creative. She would come up with extraordinary ideas that, in a way, she was like the Simon Cowell of the 1950s.
Yeah.
She would recognize talent in particularly young musicians who were just leaving music college, and she was giving them their break.
Wow.
And I think that, she would say to a phenomenal pianist, look, you can either have royalties or you can take your £100. And invariably, I think they took their £100. And then when she sold it all over the world, I think they rather regretted it.
Hey, that's an absolutely great story. That now, was it true that I'm sure it was either the Queen Mother or Queen Elizabeth II? There, she was a fan of Russ Conway, so maybe the tinkling of the ivories there was passing down the family there.
Well, I know that it was all those lovely oldies, that we used to sing. And although my parents had been in the music business, I was too young at the time to really appreciate that. So I had a gap. I mean, my treat for my sister and I was to go to Chapel Recording Studios in London.
Wow.
And my mother would be recording, I remember in particular, Half a Sixpence.
Oh, yes, of course, yes.
And, we used to sit there, we'd be told we had to be as quiet as mice. And in fact, I was almost born in that recording studio. My mother had it's expensive to hire an orchestra and a recording studio. And she hadn't quite finished, and she knew that she was giving birth to me, and she had to see it and complete the job. And she left it rather too late. And it's a short ride from Chapel Recording Studios, which was in Bond Street,
right,
to the London Clinic. It was probably only about a mile distance. And I was practically born in the black cab taxi that she had hailed. But whether that, when she was pregnant with me, her partner, Cyril Ornadell, who was the greatest sort of conductor of the 1950s, he used to conduct the Royal Variety Show every Sunday night.
Right.
And he was the only man trusted to bring My Fair Lady over from New York.
Wow.
By the producer. And so he had to go to New York, sit in a box for a month, learning to conduct quietly in the dark, so that when the singer took a breath, he allowed the pause.
Yes.
And so that when he brought the show to London, it was seamless. And if it wasn't seamless, Cyril, I think, would be told off.
Well, you were mentioning about how the hospital was just like just down the road, as it were, from the recording studio there, and here's what the recording Half a Sixpence. If your mother had given birth to you in the studio, then maybe they would have sung that song. What a picture! What a picture! What a photograph!
You've got it. Yeah. What a fabulous song that is, and so many wonderful songs from all the shows of that period.
Fabulous. You'll have to incite me into what records there are out there, because that you recorded, because it would be lovely to play them on my Phil Wilson's Vinyl Revival show.
Well, I will make a point of giving you that information, over the next week, if I may, and then
that would be wonderful.
And the other thing that she did was she got the music rights to Beatrix Potter.
Wow.
So she put all the Beatrix Potter's stories to music. Hey. And in America, they had come up with 45s that were printed in color.
Wow.
So these small records,
yes,
that were produced were yellow, green, red. And she was the first person to bring that to England.
As if to have the first picture disc.
Oh, and it was wonderful. I was only a young boy, but to listen to Peter Rabbit,
yes,
and all the famous actors that she used,
and all the music to go with it as well, really entertaining.
Very, very entertaining. It did bring it all alive. And Cyril Ornadell was marvelous. He would write the music. and slotted in to the appropriate places in the story. And these were very, very popular. They sold. I mean, don't let me give you the impression that they really made any money out of it, because my mother, being a true creative,
Yes.
was much more interested in getting the best talent and doing the finest job and doing sometimes the most expensive projects. So if by accident one project worked well financially, she plowed it all into the next one, which didn't work quite so well. But that's art, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it's all there available on vinyl as well, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, going back to history and following your time in the Navy, you studied chartered surveying at Cirencester Royal Agricultural College and began your second successful career in property. You are the former owner of 17th century Grade 2 listed Kingstone Lisle Park in Oxfordshire. And it was here that you spent 20 years as a church warden and kick-started the Kingston Lisle Festival Choir, receiving much encouragement from Bishop Peter, the retired Bishop of Norwich. Bishop Peter became a great friend and inspired you to create your own personal book of prayer. What was it like getting the encouragement in starting the Kingston Lisle Festival Choir?
Well, let me say that Bishop Peter had been the Bishop of Norwich, absolutely charismatic man. And I only knew him really in the last few years of his life,
Right.
but he really made an impact. And one of the things that he introduced to me was the concept of having a prayer book that you create yourself, so that you have just on one page the prayers that you might say on a daily basis.
Yes.
And then a different prayer that you might want to do once a week, and other prayers that are once a month, and other prayers for the sick, and then finally the departed. And that has helped me very much since then. And I'm actually quite amazed. I've spoken to vicars since,
Yes.
and they've never heard of this. And so I think it's just an important message to put across. You know, we all have family that invariably need some help from time to time, and it's nice to include them and friends, you know, in our prayers. And yes, I am religious. I don't usually wear it on my sleeve, but it is important to me to go to church on Sundays. And I think that if it helps me, it can help others by talking about it.
Indeed, and it is great to have the your personal book of prayer, because it's something that can carry you through all of your life experiences and maybe help you along as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm a firm believer that he does help you if you ask him. But most people don't ask him.
No, they don't. And they go, well, why isn't that happening? You need to ask.
You know, I spend quite a bit of time, you know, I've written various religious music as well. So it's a complete cross section. Most of my music, like Paris, which I've just released,
Yes,
are romantic love songs. They have also been heartbreak songs. And, you know, I try and get the balance right.
right.
You want songs to be real, and invariably for a lot of people that's heartbreak, but equally you want to give hope, and that's the romantic. And this time round, I mean, I never particularly plan my songs, but this I had to sit down because I realized it was Valentine's Day. I didn't have a present. And I thought, oh my goodness, I better come up with a song.
Well, I'm telling you what it is, Jamie. I'm going to actually be picking up where that story began there a little bit later on, if you don't mind.
Fine.
Before you tell us the whole story, because I've got to ask you this. What was it like starting the Kingston Lisle Festival Choir, and is it still around today?
Well, let me just explain back a bit. You know, I've been church warden for 20 years. Our vicar was very old and due to retire. And like many village churches, there wasn't a large congregation.
Yeah.
There sometimes were just the vicar and the 2 church wardens and the organist. And there was a proposal to close the church.
Oh.
And I felt that would be a great, great shame. It was a 12th century Norman church. And I felt there was nothing wrong with the church itself.
No.
Now, when there was retirement, we had a period of interregnum, which invariably follows the retirement of a vicar. And it lasts about a year. I think in our case, it probably lasted nearly 2 years. And we were blessed that in the next door village, Bishop Peter arrived in retirement, and he was supposed to be taking life easy. He could have joined 6 of the local churches, but he adopted, luckily, our church at Kingston Lisle. And he said, do you mind if I take the services? Oh my goodness. Within about 3 weeks, we had a congregation of 90 people.
Oh my goodness, amazing.
Isn't that extraordinary? In a village of 200. I mean, that was phenomenal. It shows the power of having a charismatic leader in the pulpit. And he said to me, as part of the drive to bring life to the church, he said, Jamie, you're a musician. Could you please consider starting a festival choir for the major occasions? So I put it out there, asked anyone in the village, and luckily for me, saved my bacon. Along came about 12 volunteers. We didn't audition, so it didn't matter what the voices were like, but the spirit was there, and it really lifted the roof of the church.
Excellent. After all those years as well, and especially when they were thinking of maybe closing it.
Absolutely. And I hadn't really sung in a choir since I'd sung it with Wantage Choral Society. And I have to say that my singing only came to me later in life. And I joined Wantage Choral Society. There were about 90 singers.
Right.
And the first one we did was Judas Maccabeus. I was so nervous. And looking back, I was somewhere near the front row, and everyone else had done many, many, many years with Wantage Choral Society. I think I was the youngest by far. And looking back, of course, I was one of 90, and I was so nervous. And then I started singing lessons with Betty Bleakley, who lived in the village. She was a retired opera singer, and her husband Desmond taught the piano. And I said, oh, Betty, will you teach me how to sing? She said, not necessarily. She said, I'll have to audition you. And of course, little did I know, she would take anybody's money, actually. And thanks to them, I'm so grateful to Betty, her patience, because, you know, I started with no talent at all. I just had a burning desire. And, you know, what I would say to people is, it doesn't matter what talent you have got. What really is important is how much you want it. and I wanted it very badly to be able to sing, even if it was in my shower.
Which is a good rehearsal room, isn't it, for yourself?
Well, there's good acoustics. It can be rather unrealistically flattering. And then it was the local hunt. And I'm not into hunting, but I was at a dinner, and these two ladies next to me kept on filling my wine glass. I wondered why. And every time I turned to one, the other would secretly fill the glass. And at the end of dinner, they said, Jamie, we've got a pantomime coming up. Would you sing in the pantomime? Well, I'd never performed in public as a soloist.
Right.
And boy, in the morning, I regretted. I thought, did I really say yes? And I'm so grateful to them because they bullied me. They twisted my arm to appear in this panto, which Jessica Reed sang with me, and we sang All I Ask of You from Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, beautiful song, that one. I like that.
Oh, it's lovely.
Yes.
And Betty did say to me, Jamie, if you sing this song, you'll win it. And it was 3 nights running, and we won it all 3 nights. It was quite embarrassing. In the end, people were I'm going to pass this on because it was a very clever way of fundraising for any society. White envelopes, empty envelopes on the chairs.
Right.
And people sit down. There were 12 acts, and they wrote the act number that they were voting for. And it wasn't one person, one vote. It was how much cash they stuffed in the envelope.
Wow, that's an excellent idea.
Yeah. And so the first night, maybe there was the odd bit of money going in favor of Jamie Lonsdale and Jessica Reed.
Bob.
And by the second evening, placards had started to appear. Do not vote for Jamie Lonsdale and Jessica Reed. So, of course, the people who wanted me to win shoved in the odd 50 quid.
Wow.
By the third night, everyone knew they had to put in 50 quid to vote against me. and I think that the society raised about £10,000.
Wonderful.
From the sale of 200 tickets a night and all of those white envelopes. It was a painless way of fundraising, which was enjoyable for everybody. And that's what got me into singing.
Now, Jamie, you've already appeared on BBC Songs of Praise. What with a performance of I Vow to Thee, My Country in a stunning TV debut. What was it like appearing on such an iconic show?
Absolutely extraordinary. I felt so humbled being asked to such a high profile performance, and very nerve-wracking. When you've never done television before.
Yes.
And not really understanding how it works. And it was all the way down in Plymouth.
Right.
And we were going to film it right up on the sort of cliffs above the harbour. But there was a storm, which was so bad, they had to search around very quickly for a church. And of course, we all squeezed into the church. And I have to say, they made me feel so welcome. And Songs of Praise is a great show. It's been running, I don't know for how many years, rather like the Mousetrap in London.
That's right.
It goes on. And it's lovely because it's one where the audience participates invariably as well. So you get the congregation singing for half of it, and then they get a soloist to do something.
Yes.
And it talks about what's going on in the local community and people's faith. So I think it's actually a very interesting program. And it's the sort of program that sits there. It's on. The television is on a Sunday morning.
Yes.
Or Sunday afternoon. And people are not necessarily sitting down to watch it. And so you can imagine for my few friends, it was a bit of a shock.
They nearly dropped the spuds as they were peeling them.
Yeah, that was
Is that
shock.
Jamie on the telly?
It was really nice because, they repeated it, once or twice.
Yes.
And they said, and that made me even more nervous. They said, this will never go away. This will come back and haunt you forever. So I'm very grateful to them, I must say. They're lovely, very professional, and so many cameras. I didn't know which one to look at.
And there's some of them up in the
up in the gods.
They're up in the gods there, and you're going, what's going on here? It's like Top of the Pops in church.
It is, absolutely. And I was lucky because Mary Jess, who won X Factor, the equivalent of X Factor in China, we sing a lot together, and she's always very kind and sings in my concerts, and we get on very well. And she was asked to sing in the same program, so we actually sang, a duet or two that we had both written, Alleluia, which appears on my second album called Footprints.
Right.
And so that's rather nice.
Now, it took you 38 years to sing solo. What was it that made you take the plunge?
Well, if I rewind just a little, at the age of 6, my neighbour in London invited me to Peter Pan, the panto.
Right.
And unfortunately for me, his parents had taken a box. So we were basically on the side of the stage.
Right.
And whilst we had a good view, the cast couldn't see me. And the reason I say that is they said, look, would any child like to come on the stage and help us sing this song?
Right.
And I stood up and I put my hand up and I waved frantically. And in that moment, I remember the feeling, and the feeling was so strong it came over me. I thought, this is what I want to do. And they chose somebody else from the sort of front row of the stalls.
Right.
And he did it very, very well. But I came back to my vicar and I said, I want to sing a solo. And he said, well, I'll tell you when the time's right. And it didn't matter because the average congregation was so small. There was nothing to get nervous about. But the following Sunday, unknown to me, it was the Christmas carol service.
Right.
So 90 people turned up to the church. It was once a year, full church. And he suddenly says, Jamie is now going to come up and sing something without warning. And I went up, I knew everybody in the village. They were all there in front of me. And I was about to open my mouth. I think I was going to sing, Once in Royal or something like that.
Yes.
And my sister was in the front pew and she put her fingers in her ears and lifted her elbows. And because she was older than me, that was pretty powerful. And I lost my nerve and I ran back without singing and hid in my mother's coat for 32 years.
Oh my goodness.
Always too frightened. So at school, I was in the choir, I was head of choir. Ralph Allwood was our music director, the most phenomenal choral director. And he'd say, Jamie, I want you to sing the solo and in the concert. Sorry, Ralph, I don't mind being your head of choir, but please never ask me to sing a solo. And it was my greatest fear. I literally could not do it. And it was only when Betty started really teaching me to sing. She said, Jamie, the condition is you have to sing a solo once a month in Oxfordshire, whichever concert hall or theatre we go to. Yeah. And if I didn't say yes, she would refuse to teach me. So I was bullied in. And I remember that first time, my knees were knocking. I mean, literally, visually, I was shaking.
Oh, yes, with the legs, jelly legs.
And by the third month, I suddenly realized, hey, I'm enjoying this. And
Excellent.
Of course, for anybody, it doesn't matter what their greatest fear is, but if they can be bold enough to face it head on, then it can be empowering. And it then immediately became my greatest passion.
And you've done very well as well, because you've been writing music, you've been performing music, and your new single, Paris, is out now and starts with the accordion, and then piano, strings, brass and flutes are introduced. I hear this was inspired by a recent visit. Could you tell us about that?
Well, yes, I went for a romantic weekend to Paris. And I think for most people, they would probably half would agree that Paris is one of the most romantic cities on earth. I think the other half might say Venice.
Yes.
And for me, it's Paris. We had a very lovely romantic time. And that inspired me. You know, I write my songs from personal experience.
Yes.
Whether it be heartbreak or love songs. I don't normally sit down and think I must write a song today, but with Paris, that's what I did. And I had very little expectation that it would work, because, you know, with art, you've got to be in the mood.
Yes.
And it just came to me. And I'm too close to know whether it's one of my better songs, but personally, if asked, I would feel it's probably my best song yet. I think it's catchy, and hopefully with everybody who has been lucky enough to go to Paris, it might trigger some lovely memories and lovely feelings. And so I'm quite proud of it. I'm very grateful to Robert Amory. Now, Robert is, you know, probably one of the leading conductors in this country. Mm-hmm. And he and I have worked together a few years now. When I've sung my song, the melody, and I'm happy with the lyrics, I'll probably spend about a month singing it just to sort of, can I improve it? Can I improve it?
Yes.
And when I reach that stage, I'll go to Robert's house for the day. He'll sit at the piano, and then we will work on a piano arrangement underneath. And that's where I said to him, oh, I really feel piano, accordion, a cello. That's what I feel should be underneath.
Yes.
And then I sort of go, no, not that, we're on to something.
Yes.
Let's travel with that. And by the end of the day, we had finished. And that brilliance comes from him. I then leave it to him to do the orchestration, because that's totally above my pay grade. He's very good orchestrator, and he has an orchestra called the National Philharmonic Orchestra. We were lucky enough to be able to use them in Abbey Road Studios, and that really lifted the roof. And I'm now so happy that people can actually hear the song.
I mean, when I listened to the tune, I just listened to the tune to refresh myself just before speaking to you today, Jamie, and it starts nice and gentle, and then it's got that big sound of the orchestra, and that's how I was able to pick out all of those instruments, because I love, the way that productions can be put together and how the instruments are all laid so beautifully, and I think it sounds absolutely wonderful because it's like it really lifts you up. So it starts nice and gentle, and then it's like, oh, where's this come from? So it's absolutely wonderful, Jamie.
Oh, well, thank you, Phil. Thank you very much, because you listen to so much music that when you say that means a lot. Thank you.
No problem at all. Now, on another note, have you ever bought a vinyl record? And if so, what is your favorite if you are to put the needle on the record right now on a turntable?
For me, I was very much into classical music.
Right.
So I can remember the record that I bought as a boy, Fleetwood Mac.
Wow, excellent.
And that was a long time ago, but they were my favorite. And then by the time I got into Queen, it was cassettes.
Yes.
And there was one other song as a boy I absolutely loved, Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Oh, I love that song. It's a beautiful song. Yes, Simon and Garfunkel.
Yep. And I think Elton John as well, but otherwise I was very square, as a teenager. All my friends were into Pink Floyd and all this, Rolling Stones, the Beatles. I loved the Beatles. But a lot of it went over my head. And, I was practicing the piano an hour a day. I was scraping the violin for half an hour a day. Right. I was going to choir practice, and that didn't leave a lot of time to really expand my variety of music.
Absolutely fantastic. A bit of Fleetwood Mac. I like them myself as well. Now, where can listeners follow you and buy your music?
Well, they can go to Apple Music. They can go to Spotify. I think all the streaming services have my music. I love people to go to your show.
Yes.
And I would encourage people also to look at YouTube, because there they get not only the song, but they get the video with it.
Yes, of course. And I haven't caught the video yet. Is it out there now, Jamie?
It is. It's been out there for a week now, and I am tickled pink by the lovely comments that people have written. And, when you don't know these respondents, it's very encouraging. And whilst, one person wrote in French, my French is very bad, but it was just good enough to read that, oh, why is this person not known?
Right.
And that was a lovely, I am under the radar. I think when you start singing and writing songs, I only wrote my first song about 6 years ago.
Right.
You're not in my case, I'm not that good looking 18-year-old that suddenly has 1 million followers. Age is a little bit of a barrier, but that is my challenge.
Yes, well, age is just a number.
It is, and I feel young, and of course, one's always an embarrassment to one's children. If you do anything that is different to the other dads, you're an embarrassment. But I hope quietly, they do occasionally come to my cabarets, and I've got a show In fact, I've got 3 shows coming up. And it's so, I love it when they come. It's a sort of very warm feeling I get. And I feel most alive when I'm on stage, because you get such an energy.
Yes. It's nice to get the audience reaction, isn't it?
It is. And I always get them to join in the first song when I come on stage. And that gets everybody breathing.
Yes, it does. It gets
and what
them
I
settled
love
in.
about the Pheasantry, where I perform, on a quarterly basis, the show starts at 8 o'clock, and the auditorium opens at 6:30. So they're well oiled. They have a pizza and a beer, glass of wine, and by the time, I always invite a couple of friends to come and sing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the variety of the show. It's different every time. And you can immediately tell the audience are warm. And the battle is half won.
And that's the best way, isn't it? Now, Jamie, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Please, could you introduce your latest single?
Well, thank you very much, Phil. And I really enjoyed being on your show. And I do hope that people will enjoy this little trip for the next 4 minutes to Paris, a song that I wrote on Valentine's Day for somebody very special. And I hope it will reawaken not only people's dreams, but their memories.
Jamie, they are beautiful words. Jamie Lonsdale, thank you so much for joining me on the show. And everyone, look up Jamie Lonsdale on YouTube there and stream his new single as well, Paris. All the best to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.